This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg. Our podcast and YouTube channel, Spirit Matters Talk, found at spiritmatterstalk.com. If you go to YouTube, just search Spirit Matters Talk. Matters is plural, and you'll find us. We have about 300 shows in our archives. I want to thank those people that have contributed to help keep us on the air. If you'd like to contribute to give us support, please go to spiritmatterstalk.com. It'll tell you how to do it. And if you can, please subscribe. It costs nothing. Just click where it says subscribe, and we will greatly appreciate that. Tremendous guest today. Very excited about Stephen G. Post. He is the founding director of the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love and the founding director of the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics at Stony Brook University School of Medicine in New York. He is a best-selling author. He's the author of Why Good Things Happen to Good People. He has recently authored God and Love on Route 80. And he has a new book since then coming out that we'll also be discussing today. So thank you so very much, Stephen, for taking the time to come on with us today.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for having me, Dennis, and Philip as well.
Stephen, Dr. Post, perhaps you could give us a bit of your background, what brought you to the work you do, and especially the spiritual dimension, since that's our focus here at Spirit Matters. Why are you on a program about spirituality, given your distinguished career in academia and medicine?
I have always been shaped by an early life spiritual experience, an experience of remarkable synchronicity that would fall into the category, well, Dossie would speak of one mind. I was a boy up in a prep school in New Hampshire, St. Paul's, an Episcopal outfit. I was very interested in spiritual history, in spiritual classics, even at the age of 14 or 15. I never went to the hockey games, but I spent a lot of time walking through the beautiful woods with a book in hand, peripatetically. And when I was 15, I had a recurring dream. It would come early in the morning, kind of between wake and sleep, and it was brief. I'd never had a recurring dream before. I didn't know what to think of it, but I saw a road to the west. The road was very misty. I couldn't see far on it. I looked to my left and I thought I saw a young man about to jump off a ledge. Then the face of a woman, an angelic type woman, came into my view, and she said, "If you save him, you too shall live." Mm-hmm. And I then saw that the mist evaporated and it was a brighter blue sky. And I told my friends in sacred studies class about this, people like Charlie Scribner and Ned Perkins and all these kinds of folks up there. And we talked about it. I even went to Yale Div School and in a class on adolescent spirituality with Jim Diddies, who was a Jungian, because my teacher there, Rod Wells, had been to Yale Div School. And I talked about this dream, and the students, there were about 20 of them, they were Masters of Divinity students. They asked me what it meant. I said, well, we all read Emerson's Oversoul up there in New Hampshire, but I think I'm the only one who actually believes in it, that there is this kind of oversoul, this sort of universal mind that we all participate in. And so that was really kind of phenomenal. They said, did the dream make you do anything? Well, I said, I did something that no St. Paul's kid has ever done. I applied to Reed College in Portland, Oregon. And so that was that. And then fast forward 2 years, I'm actually headed for Swarthmore. I'm home for the week, for the summer. I've got a job in the Bronx tutoring. I like to tutor a lot. I tutored French Canadians in New Hampshire. And My father and mother completely resisted this. They put their foot down. They said, it's too dangerous for you to do that. So we argued for a few days, and my dad was the president of a department store you may remember on Fifth Avenue called W&J Sloan. It was a furniture store, since gone under. And he said, your mother doesn't want you to do this. I don't want you to do this, so you can't do it. And if you insist on this, we're not going to help you out with college. So this got a little bit acrimonious, more than a little bit. And I said, okay, I won't take this job, but what do you have for me? What am I going to do? And my dad, who knew all the lampshade and furniture manufacturers around Greater New York, said, I can get you a job at Bill DeBono's lampshade factory in Patchogue on the South Shore. And so I drove my dad's very secondhand gray Mercedes 190 to Patchogue for 2 weeks, worked on a line cutting cardboard for these shades between two very large Italian women. There was no air conditioning. And after 2 weeks with a copy of Siddhartha in my pocket, I drove that Mercedes out to West Hampton Beach. And I met with some of my friends out there who had been at St. Paul's with me. And about 11 at night, I said, you know, I'm going west. I'm following the dream. I knew that the road in the dream was headed to the west. That was my intuition. So I drove that Mercedes. I drove it through the Midtown Tunnel. I drove over the George Washington Bridge for the first time in my life. And the first sign I saw that said west was Route 80 West. So I went on Route 80 West, and I drove through I drove through the Water Gap. I drove through Pennsylvania. I had about $50 in my pocket. I was 17 at the time. And I was thinking to salvage my reputation. I was going to do a U-turn across the Midway and get back home before I was out of gas. And lo and behold, just as I was about to do that, the generator broke. You know, cars had generators back then. Most of them don't anymore. And when that happened, everything was dead instantaneously. Every light, the engine, everything. So I managed to get over on the right-hand side. And, you know, I'd been thinking about alchemy and such traditions. And I wondered, is this a sign for me to go forward? Because I was just about going to do my U-turn, but something was pushing me forward. So I took a piece of paper. This is infamous. This is a confession, okay? I took a piece of paper out of the glove compartment and I wrote a note that became famous in my family. I mean, my brother Henry Post, who co-founded the New York Magazine, and others would tell you all about this. It said, to the Pennsylvania State Police, this is at the Lewisburg exit, please return this car to Henry A.V. Post, 44 Davison Lane East, West Islip, New York, 516-669-5655, from his son, who no longer works in the lampshade factory. That was bad.
Let me ask, I mean, I have to think that this is the basis of your book, God and Love on Route 80. And by the way, in 1971, 50 years ago, I did that same ride I did it from New Jersey up by the George Washington Bridge all the way to San Francisco.
Oh, you did? Yeah, because if you're in Frisco, there are signs that say Route 80 East in downtown San Francisco. So absolutely. So what happened was I had my classical guitar. I played a lot of Granados and Villalobos, and I had $50 in my wallet and a couple of spare pieces of clothing and my Siddhartha book. And I put my thumb out, and I won't go into the details, but I made my way all the way to San Francisco, okay? Following up on Dennis.
Did your father get the car?
Okay, so I called my mother. I was riding in a van full of hippies at that point who I'd met in Chicago, and they had convinced me that I should call my mom and tell her I was alive. So I called my mom Colette from Lincoln, Nebraska, from a side, from a telephone booth, and my mom said, "Oh, Stevie, you're alive. We thought you were dead. Now we can call up the Pinkertons, detectives." And I said to my mother, again, this is really bratty. I said, "Mom, you should have let me take that job. By the way, you don't need to call the Pinkertons. Didn't you get my note?" And so we had a conversation, and she recognized that maybe they should have given me a little more space. But I went out to San Francisco. I spent the summer on Chenery Street in the Mission District with my cousin George Lamont, who had been in Vietnam for 2 tours of duty. Really great guy. And I played Hispanic music in restaurants and loved it. And I had no intention of going to college at that point, but I drew a really lousy number in the draft. I called Reed College and I said, I know you let me in, but I turned you down. Now I really need a place because I don't want to go over there and do the things people had to do. So they let me in. And early September, I'm in front of the Nichiren Shosho Buddhist temple because I'd been chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo that summer with beads and felt beyond time and place when I did so. And I enjoyed that a lot. So I was down in front of the temple, Chenery and Market, with an old man named Gus, with George, with some friends, and they gave me a Gohonzon, which is a Japanese Buddhist scroll. It's got some nice symbols on it, one mind, one heart, infinite truth, things like that. And so I had my Gohonzon, put it in my backpack, and I took the bus from Market Street to Golden Gate Park. I walked across the park. It's early in the morning. It's about 7:30, 8 in the morning. And I walked up that sort of rocky entrance to the George Washington, to the San Francisco, to the Golden Gate Bridge. And I walked across, I got to the middle of the bridge. It was very foggy. I could not see more than maybe 3 or 4 feet in front of me. And I heard a kind of a scratching sound to the left. And I looked over the rail, and there was a kid who, I don't know what was going on with him, but he was agitated. He had long, stringy blonde hair, and he looked like he was about to jump. And he reminded me of the young man I'd seen in my dream. So I said to him, first off, I truly hope you're not planning to jump. And then he turned at me aggressively, and he was quoting Macbeth and life is empty nothingness and all these things. And I said, you're really good with that. It sounds more realistic when you're out there about to jump than it did at Memorial Hall at St. Paul's School. And I said, listen, I'm here for a reason. I think it's possible that I came all the way across the country just to encounter you at this particular moment in this particular situation. And so he said, well, he actually had lots of expletives about that because he didn't believe any of it. And I said, well, let me tell you. So I told him about the dream. I told him about the argument with my folks. I told him about leaving the car with a note to the Pennsylvania State Police. He thought I was crazy at that point. And I said, but you're the one out there about to jump. And then I said, here I am. And I think based on a dream I had 2 years ago and 3,000 miles away, coast to coast, I think I'm here for a reason and I'm supposed to meet you. So he started cussing again. And I said, look, I'll make you an offer. If you come across the railing to the pedestrian, I was on the pedestrian walkway, and you stand here with me, I'm going to give you something that's going to change your luck forever. I'm going to give you a Gohonzon. So he was kind of curious, and I told him a little bit about it, and he was calming down. He walked over the little railing area, and he stood by me, and I unscrolled my Gohonzon. I explained as best I could a few of the symbols, and I said, look, you can have this, but here's a note. You have to go walk through the park and take the bus. I gave him some little money, and you have to go to my cousin George Lamont, who has a home on Chenery Street. He was actually building superintendent. And it said, Dear George, this is Harry. Please let him sleep on the floor, or I was sleeping on the floor. Bring him down to the temple, introduce him to some people, and take care of him. And so we shook hands. He walked south toward the park. I walked north toward Oregon. And as we parted ways, I'm looking north. Suddenly, all that mist and fog just dissipated. And it was this really bright, luminary, radiant morning sky, blue and yellow. And I somehow felt intuitively that I was living out the dream. I didn't quite know what "you too shall live" meant till I got up to Reed College. I hitchhiked up to Reed, and that January, I'm in the coffee shop, and I was not really a good executive thinker. So this guy came bounding into the coffee shop on a Friday night. His name was Andy. He was lit up and he had a motorcycle jacket on. And he said, "Who wants to go for a ride on my brand new Harley Davidson Shovelhead?" And I said, "I do." So it's about 9 at night. I went out into the parking lot. I got on this motorcycle and he took off. He went about, he hit 160 in Portland. Stop signs, traffic lights, shot through them. Then he goes south on the Pacific Coast Highway for an hour. He hit 180. It was raining. It was slushy. It doesn't get snowy, but it was slushy. And we were skidding all over the place. And I thought I was dead. I actually cried because I thought that was the end. And then he actually did this incredible U-turn over the Midway. He went back to Portland with me screaming and he yelling into the rain. He dropped me off exactly where he picked me up. I staggered across the ravine to Ackerman Dormitory where I lived. And I never picked up the payphone in that place. My parents could not get a hold of me. But I walked across the threshold and the phone rang. And I didn't see anything, but I just felt pushed toward the phone. And I just can't really explain it. It was an energy of some kind. So I picked up the phone and I said, "Hello." And it was my mother. She said, "Oh, thank God you're alive." And she explained that she'd woken up. She's in New York, so she's 3,000 miles away again. 3,000 miles away, and she's woken up and she's had a premonition that I was about to die or that I was dead. And I explained to her my experience on Andy's motorcycle, and I said, I thought I was dead too. And at that point, we connected for the first time in years because she was a bit of an Irish mystic. And so that's episode 2. But the whole thing of, if you save him, you too shall live. At that moment in time, and it's somewhat idiosyncratic. What I felt was that somehow by meeting Harry on the bridge and helping Harry get off the ledge, and I did see him, by the way, at Thanksgiving, and he was with cousin George, and then he went back to North Carolina, where I guess he was from. But somehow or another, because of that, I had set up the conditions in this world of connectedness in one mind so that I didn't die on the motorcycle. And my mom, who was an abstract expressionist painter of some note in New York, Molly Post, she painted a painting called "The Blue Angel Dream," which is actually in the book. And so the book just goes on and on. It talks about different episodes of synchronicity. And so that's where I got to be very interested. I eventually quit a PhD program at UPenn in immunology, and I went to the University of Chicago Divinity School, where all Blue Angel dreamers need to end up. And I was able to study with Mircea Eliade.
Oh my.
And even Joseph Campbell was there half the year.
Oh.
And I told the two of them in the Swift Kick dining room about my dream and about the car. And Mircea Eliade, who was very sort of Eastern, he was very European, French. You could hardly understand what he said. He looked into his coffee, stirring it with his little bit of spoon, and he said, "Sounds like synchronicity."
Confirmation.
And Joseph Campbell said, "Your car broke for a reason." So I'll leave it at that. That's how I got started.
There's the origin story, and I could
Bill,
see
you have to turn up your volume a bit.
my volume.
Yeah.
Oh, how's this?
Good.
I can see in your origin story how you would come to the study of goodness, of doing good things, and of ethics and related things. Can you tell us briefly what the sort of bottom line findings you have either done in your own research or others related research about doing good?
it's good to be good. Even in very, very difficult environments, like the Stoics all understood, like Viktor Frankl understood in a prison camp. No matter what your circumstances, instead of descending into this negative spiral of bitterness and hatred and destructive emotions, you have it within you to connect with this unlimited, infinite mind, infinite heart, infinite love, which we all can possess and can harvest in challenging times. And you can manage to control what you can control. You can still live by the golden rule. I mean, I to this day, I get up every morning. I'm up by 5 o'clock, usually 4:30. I meditate for at least a half an hour. I pray. I still go to an Episcopal church when I have a chance. And I envision the interactions of the day, and I have this wheel of love, which was the basis of why good things happen to good people, where love is when the happiness and security of another is as real to you as your own, you love that person. Harry Stack Sullivan created that definition. But it can be expressed in kindness, in forgiveness, in gratitude, in creativity, in compassion, in attentive listening. So I go through a kind of rehearsal of all the people I know are in this book, because I'm with people all the time in this busy medical center, and I prep myself so that I stay centered, and I meditate a lot, I breathe a lot. I have this little 1 minute meditating thing.
Happy.
I got from the Brahma Kumaras at the UN, and so I take little breaks, but I try to stay spiritually centered. I like the early morning because that's before the world's been roughed up by human nature at its worst. And you also have a sense of, I have a sense of being beyond time and place, because I've come out of sleep and I'm not oriented to the chronology of going from point A to point B. And I could be any place, honestly. I could be in Chicago, I could be in Cleveland. So I like that period of the day, and I think that, if it's true that the supreme being in the Hindu tradition exists before time and space and before the universe, then that would be the way to connect. That's just something.
Let me ask you, Stephen. You're the founding director of the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. Is unlimited love researchable? And if it is something that you can research, what are the research tools that one would utilize? I don't doubt unlimited love, and I could say that there are times spiritually in meditation where you could have some glimpse of that. But how does one go about researching?
Well, when Sir John Templeton floated me an email in 2000, I was in my office at Case Medical School. It said, Stephen, we should start an institute to study the greatest human asset, unlimited love. And I faxed back. He didn't email. Sir John, what should we call this? The Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. He'd written a little book called Pure Unlimited Love, which is all about divine energy and love and healing. And so I had a moment of trepidation because I'm in a big medical school. And I said, well, Sir John, maybe we should call it the Institute for Creative Altruism. It's a little sciencey, a little drier. And he faxed back, no, unlimited love, up to $8.9 million. And I faxed back, Sir John, I love that language. It jumps right off the page. And so the Institute got started. But he kept faxing me, and he would say, I don't want you to study mere human love, which he thought was kind of unwise, which he thought was myopic, which he thought was erratic, and so forth. He said, I want you to try to study the love that made humans, which was his way of saying the love underlying the universe, because he was really a believer in this metaphysical, scientific conversation. And so I think that, one of the things we did was we did a national survey of adult Americans, and we asked them, have you had an experience of divine love? And of course, they define this differently, but 80% of Americans had said at least once. About 40% said, more than once, 20% said often, and 10% said almost all the time. So we were surprised by that. And Matt Lee, who's now the director of empirical research on altruism at Harvard, and myself and Margaret Paloma, who wrote a book some years ago with Gallup, when he was still alive, on prayer. We did a book with Oxford called The Heart of Religion, which presents the results of this study, which was really very compelling. And of course, then when you had these experiences, you have them directly, or how did you have them? And some people said, maybe 30% said directly. They just felt some energy, it just invaded them. And the others said, well, it was through someone else. It was synchronicity, you know. It was that situation where just that incredible hardship is upon me, and the perfect person at the perfect time, there they are. And so you know, it was really quite impressive. And they all said that these experiences made them feel more compassionate.
If I could ask a follow-up, the 10% that had that experience often, or almost always, was there anything they had in common?
You know, not particularly. It didn't break down by gender. It didn't have anything to do with their educational background.
They weren't all left-handed.
They weren't all left-handed. You know, these were people, they were all 18 and older. But, you know, we even interviewed, we actually interviewed about maybe 80 individuals across the country who said that they'd had great experiences. You know Auntie Annie, who does the pretzel stuff in the airports?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, she doesn't own that anymore. She's a Mennonite who lives out in Lancaster County. So we actually interviewed Auntie Annie, who told the story. It's in the book about how, you know, her husband was broke and he was trying to set up a center for young people in the Mennonite community who were having problems with mental health. And she was so frustrated that he couldn't get any support. So she had a series of dreams. And she testifies to this. She dreamed the recipe for those pretzels.
Wow.
And she made millions and millions of dollars. And then she sold it to somebody, and she gave all the money to her husband to build these. And there are now like 14 centers for mental well-being in the Mennonite and the Amish communities around Pennsylvania and Ohio.
Wow.
So
I have a question. It's probably a very old one. There seems to be some kind of chicken-egg relationship between spiritual teachings and ethical behavior. You've studied spiritual traditions, you've studied ethics scientifically. Some people say you have to teach people, you have to give them ethical principles and guidelines. All religions do that. And if it worked, we would have a different world. And other people say ethical or moral behavior follows naturally from spiritual development. And if that were completely true, we would have no scandals in religious traditions of authority figures misbehaving. How do you see the relationship between ethics or ethical behavior and spiritual teachings?
well, all of these traditions, without exception, as far as I'm aware, do teach the golden rule. Some idea of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. Of course, you can modify that like Oscar Wilde did, and say do unto others as they would have you do unto them, which makes sense. But you know, there is this, this is Martin Buber's, you know, I relate to people as they contribute to my narrow little silly agendas, or I, thou. I discover the other as other. But then in the Eastern traditions, there's also I, a third option, because I am you in that sense. So when I jump off that subway platform, and save that guy who'd had an epileptic seizure, 15 years ago and fallen into a little ravine with the subway coming over. When you jump over that person, you can't explain this genetically. You can't explain it in any developmental way other than to say that in this moment, an individual somehow had this unbelievable awareness of oneness. And I've looked at all the E.O. Wilson stuff and even David Sloan Wilson, all the evolutionary theories of altruism, and written books about them. And I know all these people, but I think in the end, it's the one mind, and it's our insight into its reality that oftentimes helps us do things that are really quite remarkable. The guy who, Gene Autry, the guy who jumped off that platform, had a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old daughter who he left there, which some people raised doubts about. But this was, and when they asked him why he did this, he was in the Navy. So he said, well, I was in the Navy and that's what we do. So it was a role altruism. But I think it was more than that. It was when they really talked with him, he said, just for some reason, I totally forgot myself. I didn't exist. I didn't feel any pressure at all. I was going to jump, and I covered that man's body, and it was a mystery to him. It was actually a mystery to him. And so I think that spirituality at its best teaches us about the one mind and the one heart, and our participation in it. Unfortunately, human nature is not a pretty thing. Unconnected with this kind of inward dimensionality, human nature can be very vile, as all the people from Hobbes to Freud to Reinhold Niebuhr articulated. Look at the Lord of the Flies. The one person who's out there meditating in the woods, Sam, is ultimately killed and is impaled. So I'm not naive about human nature, but human nature, when connected, as Sir John always said, when connected with the love that made humans.
But let me ask, those listening in even me might think, I don't always have that connection. Some people might say, I've never had that connection. I admire people who do. How do I make that connection? Is there a path? Is there a way?
Yeah, there is a way, and that's why in the Upanishads, you've got so much early on about the golden rule. So when I was a boy up in New Hampshire, Norman Rockwell had done that painting called The Golden Rule, that sort of iconic painting where you've got the golden rule in gold, do unto others, and then you've got all these people from every background, race, gender, color. There they are, and they're all looking peacefully, and they're meditating on this idea of using your talents to help others. And then when Rockwell was talking about that image, which made it to the cover of the Saturday Evening Post, no relationship, and this is like 5 years before the Civil Rights Movement. It was really a very interesting way of injecting this into the culture. He said to us, we were just gathered around. I was probably 13. He said, do you see the circle, the halo? And we looked and looked and looked, and finally we saw it. So there is a white circle that begins with the rabbi's beard up on top, if you look at the image, and then it goes to the right. There's the toddler's white shirt. Then you go down, you come up below, and there's a woman with a white shawl on. And he said, I'm not religious. But he said, I think that when we try to live as best we can by the golden rule, we do no harm, and we go beyond that minimalism, and we try to really contribute and help others. He said, when we live that way, best we can. He said, it's like surfing. Okay. He said, you have to paddle really hard with all of your energy to catch the wave. But at a certain point, all you have to do is balance. At a certain point, the wave has its own energy. You don't have to paddle anymore. You just have to ride the wave. And he said, that's what spirituality is. So Um, there's a lot of distortion and a lot of vile greed and horrible reality to human nature. But I do think that to get there, as you mentioned, the classic response, which I believe to this day is the case, is that if we do our best, we won't be perfect. I'm into the spirituality of imperfection. Not that I'm an AA member, but I believe in that stuff. You do your best, and you can get closer to God through living by the golden rule, and however you want to call it, supreme being, ultimate reality, infinite energy, mystery. It doesn't matter to me. But when you do that, it kind of invades you and carries you. And I'm not going to read anything to you, but if you have 1 second. So I have a favorite poet, and that is W.H. Auden, who was kind of a mystic hippie who hung around the Oxford colleges and everybody flocked to him, But this is just 10 lines, but it's amazing. This is what I'm talking about. One fine night in June 1933, I was sitting on a lawn after dinner, and 3 colleagues, 2 women and 1 man, we liked each other well enough, but were certainly not intimate friends, nor had anyone a sexual interest in another. Incidentally, we had not drunk any alcohol. We were talking casually about everyday matters when quite suddenly and unexpectedly something happened. I felt myself invaded by a power which, though I consented to it, was irresistible and certainly not mine. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly, because thanks to the power I was doing it, what it means to love one's neighbor as oneself. I was also certain, though the conversation continued to be perfectly ordinary, that my 3 colleagues were having the same experience. In the case of one of them, I was able later to confirm this. My personal feelings toward them were unchanged. They were still colleagues, not intimate friends. But I felt their existence as themselves to be of infinite value and rejoiced in it.
Where can I find that book?
That is in a book called The Protestant Mystics, which was, you can get it secondhand on Amazon. It goes back about 35 years. And it has a foreword by W.H. Auden, where he quotes this experience he had.
Wow.
And so I mean, I was sitting here in my office like 5 years ago, and there was a Korean American student from Queens. She was about to drop out of medical school. She was really struggling. She couldn't acculturate well, and she just came to she showed up at my door, and I asked her name, and she said she was really wanting to talk with me. And I said, look, I can't do it now because I've got all these meetings lined up, but email me and we can get together in a couple of days. But then something just right in this room, right at this desk, okay, I'm here, and suddenly I feel this energy over my right shoulder. I actually looked around. I spun around because I couldn't believe it. And there was nothing there. It was like what happened at Reed College in the common room. There was nothing there, and I wasn't seeing anything. I wasn't hallucinating, but I just felt this energy. And I knew at that moment that I had to drop everything, all my appointments, cancel them all. And I spent the next 3 hours talking to her. I became her mentor. She took a year off. She wrote on her own spirituality and medicine and professionalism under my guidance. And she came back to medical school. She's now practicing very successfully and has a beautiful family. And, I mean, God knows she had no money at all. She came from an absolutely impoverished family. Her Korean mother was a nanny somewhere in Manhasset, and she'd take the bus out from Bay Ridge. But if I hadn't stopped and really given her my attention, who knows what would have happened to her? So that was the kind of thing that I can't explain it, but and it doesn't happen every day. Okay, it's not like constant, but every once in a while, I will have an experience like that.
Stephen, before we go, we only have a couple minutes. Give us.
Yeah, I actually would suggest, Phil, we do a part 2 because there's a lot of other things I certainly would like to get
We
into.
promised we would
Let's
mention
wrap this up and do a part two.
book.
What's that?
But we promised we'd mention his forthcoming book, which has to do
Right.
with Alzheimer's. So in 30 seconds, Stephen, tell us about it.
And I would like to do a follow-up interview
Okay.
just specifically on that. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I'd love to do it with you. You guys are great. Fabulous. Well, you know, in 30 seconds, so it's called Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People. And I've been working with the deeply forgetful for a long time. I don't call them demented because that's a purely negative term, a decline from a former mental state. Deeply forgetful is more mystical, you know, that you don't know what's going on underneath that silence or underneath that communicative breakdown. Maybe they've gone down to 30th Street Station. They've got one foot already up on that train bound for glory, to quote Woody Guthrie. So we just don't know. And it's all about experiences of paradoxical lucidity, which is now being studied in the literature on Alzheimer's, where people who have just been sort of gone, empty husks, suddenly they have these moments where they're more aware of themselves, oftentimes precipitated by personalized music. There's a great website called Music and Memory that Dan Cohen down the road in Mineola, we've written things together, put together. So, you know, it's really important to realize that these people who are deeply forgetful, they're not that different than we are. You know, they're part of the human, and they have consciousness. It's not their linear rationality, which is what the Western philosophers emphasize, that gives them moral status. It's the fact that they have consciousness. They can still see the sun. They can feel the wind. They can smell the chicken. You know, I mean, you know, they can be creative. They can be marvelously creative. So it's a book about broadening our approach to what makes us respect and give dignity to human life. Namaste. I honor the divine in you. You honor the divine in me. It's not Kant. It's not Locke. It's not, well, if you can't put out rational plans into the future and operationalize them, you don't count, and we can send you to a gas chamber, right? It's not that. It's much deeper.
Thank you for that.
Excellent.
I'm sure everybody who has people in their families suffering from what we call dementia or from Alzheimer's will value that. And when the book comes out, we'll have you back on the program.
It will be an honor.
I want to throw one thing out for our listeners and viewers. When you mentioned the experience you had where the man was thinking of jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, I don't know if it was on NPR or if I read it, but within the last year, I heard this story of they were interviewing people who had actually jumped off the bridge, attempting to commit suicide, but actually lived. In virtually every case, people, as soon as they jumped, they thought, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But one guy, he said, on his way to the bridge, he said, if even one person had said one word to him, hello, how are you, anything, he wouldn't have done it. So it's made it affected me in a big way when I heard that.
So I believe in gentle curiosity. I actually teach that to the medical students. Just ask your patients, how are they doing?
Yeah.
What's going on at home? This is not empathy. This is not the complexity of empathic interaction. This is just, you know, telling somebody that you care enough about them to ask how they're doing. And oftentimes that will make a big difference. So that's what you're talking about. And I guess with Harry on the bridge, I mean, the fact that I stopped and I looked at him and I just said, I truly hope you don't plan to jump. I think that was it.
That's great. Well, thank you for all the good work you're doing on goodness, and we hope to have you back soon. And everybody, you can Google Stephen G. Post, Stephen with a PH, and find a tremendous number of articles, videos, and so forth, and continue learning from him.
I learned from you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
It's been an honor.
Phil, that was Stephen G. Post. Great story. Tell a tremendous guy. We generally we have more interaction in the beginning. He talked for a long time about his background, but it was so fascinating.
Yeah.
That's why I mentioned having him back, because he's done this research on Alzheimer's, but deeply spiritual guy, obviously not representing any one tradition or technique or religion, very broad-based. He was at Yale Divinity School. He was at University of Chicago Divinity School. So strong academic background also, but a really terrific guy. And he works with people in the medical profession. And I think that's very important that they have those perspectives, people going on to treat people that are going through very serious stuff.
No, the whole field of bio and medical ethics is fascinating, but and he's made apparently great contributions to those fields. And I wonder, it's one of the things I wanted to ask him. You know, he has a background as a research scientist in these fields, and as well as his other trainings. And I wondered how people in the medical community relate to the spiritual dimension of what he's talking about, or whether he, because of his credentials and his approach to it as a research scientist, can say things that somebody like you or I couldn't.
I think that, I think especially amongst younger doctors, but even doctors from our generation or before, I think many of them develop a spiritual component, seeing life and death and all the things that they see. And certainly what he was saying about, a doctor saying, how are you doing? I think doctors these days are a lot more interactive, spend a lot more time explaining, having those types of interactions with folks. And I have to mention that when his book about cruising, and his story about cruising on Route 80, right around that same time he did it, I did my first trip with my buddy from New Jersey to California, and it was all new to me, Route 80. And actually recently I did a big trip on Route 80. So yeah, there's something spiritual about it. The country, the expansiveness. And then I was just, while we were going, my wife and I were doing this trip, we were listening to Jack Kerouac's On the Road. He was going to a lot of the same places. And at the end of the book, not to give anything away, but he discusses this vision from New York across New Jersey to then, he mentions Iowa, and then beyond that, and it's sort of like very analogous to expansion, to transcending. So anyway, but I thought that.
And I did my biography of Yogananda. He made a similar trip before there was an interstate highway, before there was a Route 80, on the small road equivalents that were very new in 1925, 1924.
Wow,
and,
must have taken a long time.
Yeah, weeks. And but those were the days in his day. He was discovering in America, and that was new to automobiles. So the roadside gas stations and motels were a very new thing. And now we have these interstates. And, I'm guessing that, Stephen Post's book is God and Love on Route 80. I'm guessing that of the millions of people who travel Route 80 probably every day, very few encounter either God or love. So it's probably
not even at the toll booths.
Hey, he mentioned he mentioned a Norman Rockwell painting called The Golden Rule. So I Googled it, and I'm going to see if I can share my screen.
Yeah, see if you can share it now.
And show it to everybody. Okay, can you see it?
There, there it is. Wow.
And he talked about the circle of white. You can't see it down here because of the label or the writing, but it goes like this. It's fascinating, and he's right. He has every race, every religious, well, most religions depicted here. And this was 1961. It's quite impressive, actually. I'd never known about that. So, Dennis, are you with me?
Yeah, I'm looking up the picture so I can see it even more clearly here. But yes, I mean, it's it's fascinating stuff. I don't think I wonder where that painting is housed, because I haven't seen it up close ever like that. Yeah.
I've always been interested in this question. I asked them about spirituality / religion and ethical behavior.
Mhm.
Because, we've seen such egregiously bad behavior on people
Mhm.
representing spiritual traditions and such. And so many good people, like my mother, who was this atheist. She was a deeply compassionate and highly ethical person. She would cite the golden rule, not even realizing it had a religious origin. To her, it was just, obvious secular ethics. And so that interaction between people evolving spiritually, do they naturally become better, more ethical in their behavior, or do they have to be taught?
Well, I think I think if they are truly spiritual, and I think because one belongs to or adheres to the rules and regulations of a particular established religion or spiritual group, that doesn't necessarily make them spiritual. Spirituality comes from within. Now, those organizations, not to be critical of them, those organizations can often, or maybe usually often, for the most part, get people to help them, or at least assist people in discovering that inner spirituality that comes, that spontaneous right action that comes from being tuned in that way. But then there are many people that belong to spiritual organizations, or even or run them or whatever, that do not have that inner spirituality.
And the question of spontaneous right action is questionable too at times, because
Right.
we have all these people who emphasize spiritual practice, many of whom claim to be enlightened and awakened and misbehave in the world. So it's a complicated question. And that leads me to mention, I'm on the board of the Association for Spiritual Integrity, which was started by friends of ours and
Right.
people we've had on the show,
Right.
to address those issues in particular. And we work very hard at coming up with a code of ethical behavior for spiritual teachers that may as well mention it here. If anybody is listening who's interested in that, please, Google Association for Spiritual.
What's the website?
It's Google Association for Spiritual Integrity.
Yeah, that's the way, and then you'll get it correctly.
It's
and the advice I think we give to people is that if somebody says they're spiritual, but they're not acting in a way you would think a spiritual person would act, then they ain't spiritual.
That's a question. In fact, I learned about Stephen Post because at ASI, at Association for Spiritual Integrity, we have occasional webinars, and he gave one of our webinars on ethical behavior.
Well, that's right.
And so that's also you can find that on our site. Anyway, I'm also interested in this. Have you seen this movie that's out now that Anthony Hopkins won the Academy Award for, called The Father?
No.
The man deteriorating with dementia.
Mm-hmm.
Deeply moving, makes you very empathic and compassionate, not just for the person afflicted, but the caretakers, especially the family,
Right.
the loved ones.
It was that movie also, The Notebook, and it was about a husband and wife, very deeply connected, and how I think it was the woman who had Alzheimer's would drift in and out and have then moments that were very lucid. But then, like what Stephen was mentioning, there are many people that seem not connected to the world, and yet they are. They still feel.
They're obviously connected, but I just saw online a story about, maybe it was in the Washington Post or New York Times, a story about a man suffering from Alzheimer's who could no longer recognize his wife. He didn't know who he was. And they fell in love.
I read
and he married her.
Yeah, a second time.
Yeah, not knowing it was the second time.
Was she fully cognizant and aware?
Apparently, I didn't read this. I only read the headlines, but
yeah, I saw that headline.
Isn't that incredible? I want the movie.
Great story.
That's
story.
amazing.
Anyway, yeah, no, it was fascinating stuff. And I
Another-
do want to have Stephen back on to discuss his.
We should definitely do that.
But it was worth taking the time to listen to his story coming from New York, getting that summer job he really didn't want to have.
No, he's a good storyteller.
Some of us have also been through that thing, getting that summer job, and then you think, get me out of here. And then how he was able to take off and leaving that note for the Pennsylvania police to bring his car back to his parents. That was classic.
He had that gift of a good storyteller to make you think he's off on a digression or a tangent, and then bringing it back
Bring it
to
back.
the purpose. It was like there he was in San Francisco and on the Golden Gate Bridge, and it was like, what does that have to do with the dream? And then
Right.
there was the payoff.
Bingo, bango. Yeah, and then he came back.
Good
And
story.
he completely went full circle with it at the end. So
All right.
it's,
So, hey, listeners, once again, let us remind you, please subscribe so you don't miss a show.
click on that subscription button.
And
over here.
you can find us on our website or our YouTube channel. But mind you, the video portion of Spirit Matters on the YouTube channel is fairly new. We only have maybe 15, 16 videos on there as of now. But you'll find about more than 250 audios with great people on our website.
Free and open and available to the public. But if you would like to contribute, it's not a donation. We're not a nonprofit. But if you would like to contribute, we would be very happy with you, because we'd like to stay on the air and we like to keep our archives open for free. And you can learn a lot in those archives.
I
because we've
have.
had some terrific people on.
I learned something new with every interview.
If you go to Krishna Das, if you're familiar with him, and we interviewed him recently, if you go to his website, our video interview, the YouTube channel interview is posted there. So we're getting around.
Okay.
All right, till next time, Phil.
Dennis.
All right.